And next up, we have our former mayoral candidate and AM for London, Peter Whittle.
Terrible picture. I kept on using that one during the campaign. I'm much more handsome than that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Jamie here on becoming new chairman of YI. Also, I think that thanks are in order, first of all, for your contribution during this amazing exercise in democracy that we saw this year. And if I may, just to be a bit parochial, because I haven't had the chance yet, I'd also like to thank people, and I can see them in the audience now, who helped out with our campaign in London. You know, you were really, really important to that. So thank you very much. A round of applause for yourself. You know, it was a brilliant campaign. And, you know, even though we are being told that Britain is divided and that the Remainers simply won't let go, the fact is it was, as I said, the most extraordinary and revivification, I think, of democracy that we've seen for years. If you need any kind of another way of looking at it, very, very interesting statistic that was produced, I think, by Conservative Home, showed that if we had done this referendum on the basis of a general election, if we'd done it on the basis of constituencies and first past the post, in other words, if we had done it the way that we usually do elections, the result would have been nearer 70-30. That is quite extraordinary. And there would have been no talk, of course, about a divided Britain if that had been the case. But I think that what I want to talk about, briefly, really, because you've had a lot of speeches really today, is don't underestimate the general impact of this referendum. It wasn't just simply about Europe, although of course it was about Europe on the face of it, but it has sent the establishment reeling, and they still are in shock now. When I say the establishment, I don't just mean Westminster and the parties in Westminster, although they are shocked enough. I mean the whole establishment. I mean the education establishment, the cultural establishment, the admin establishment, the civil service. All of these people, financiers, they really did not think it was going to happen. And so, in some ways, their whole worldview has actually received a huge knock. And I have to say that for me, as an old independent, as opposed to a young one, that is one of the most gratifying things to happen in my political lifetime. But I should just explain a bit, because I've spoken to you about this kind of thing before, YI. And I know that me and Jamie have spent many a long evening discussing this kind of thing over a few drinks, or in his case, a glass of water. But I think that one of the things is that the EU and our membership of the EU was part, and still remains a part, actually, of a whole set of orthodox ideas. These are the establishment ideas that basically any civilized person has, right? So you're talking about Europe and why it's obviously good for us to be in Europe, and at the very, very best that we should maybe just reform it. You're talking about the goodness of migration, whether it's mass migration or whatever it is. That somehow or other, this is automatically a good thing. You're talking about our attitudes to crime and punishment. That automatically a liberal approach to this sort of thing is a good thing. We're talking about multiculturalism, and basically how any civilized person automatically thinks that every society should strive towards a state of multiculturalism. All of these things have held, and do, I'm afraid, still hold, a position at the centre of the British establishment. Alongside that with the kind of negative views, which is essentially that the nation state was a sort of bad thing, that it was the home of nationalism, that it was the home of divisiveness, that it was not progressive, whatever progressive means. All of these things are essentially what the establishment feels are the correct views, and they are the ones that they make sure people have. If you don't believe me, then just look at the way that someone like Nigel Farage was treated over 20 years. And it takes a really big person actually to resist that. What I'm saying to you now is that basically this has been turned on its head. Even though this is about Europe, and we are now faced with a situation which is actually, frankly, even I'm coming to terms with, where we have a free nation again, which is extraordinary. All of these views are the ones that are the mainstream orthodox views. Now, we are now in a position, and we as a party, I would say, are in an extraordinary position, where we have got to really take this up and look upon this as a real opportunity with which finally to get rid of that ideological status, that ideological status. A huge part of that as well was a belief that sort of patriotism and a belief that somehow you felt part of something was in some way bad, That now will come to an end if we make sure it comes to an end. And I think that this is an enormous opportunity going forward, which we simply must not miss. We've got the chance now to utterly change the way that this country thinks about itself. Now, this, I think, is a sort of open goal for us. If we are to play the game of Westminster and look at the parties, the two parties, we've got Labour and we've got the Conservatives. Now, with Labour, obviously, it is imploding, to put it politely. It seems to me that its time has sort of finally and inevitably run out. And there is actually something almost kind of right that someone like Jeremy Corbyn should take over, because this has been the kind of conflict that there has now been in the Labour Party bubbling away for years. So it's brought it to the boil. But what this does, it presents us, as has been said already this morning, with the most extraordinary opportunity, along with that ideological one I first mentioned. On a purely practical level, who are the people who won for us this referendum? I would say they were working class people in the North and the Midlands, people who might have voted Labour when they even bothered to vote last. Those now are our people. And when I say that, I don't just mean it in some kind of opportunistic way, because they always were our people, actually. There were people like my parents who grew up voting Labour. They had a strong sense of social justice. They weren't free marketeer fundamentalists. They didn't even really know what that meant. But they felt that people should be treated fairly. They believed in the NHS. But, they were also fiercely proud of this country. They were monarchists. They were the people who went out and cheered the Queen, right, and all the rest of it. And they very much felt that their own personalities and their own characters were bound up with being British. Right? Those are the people who went out and voted to leave the EU. They are our people for the future, as I think Stephen has already said this morning. And secondly, as well, therefore we cannot let those people down. I was born at a time, I went to a grammar school, I'm a typical grammar school boy. There's a lot of resentment towards grammar school boys, and if you've been around long enough, you kind of know it when you see it. But we live in a time now where essentially social mobility has ground absolutely to a halt. When I went to school in the 1970s, we still had a very socially mobile country. You could do things that your parents didn't. You could, in my case, first to go to university and all the rest of it. That is what also we have got to offer Labour voters, and that is the ability to get on, and not just, as I would put it, in a crude economic sort of sense, just simply to make more money, whatever, that is great, of course, but a way basically of opening their lives, opening their opportunities to all sorts of different careers and professions. That's extraordinarily important. What can we take from the Tories? Well, we're not taking stuff as having sort of organically replaced them, I'd say. When it comes to the Tories, I'd say, for example, the Tories were always known as the party of law and order. Do you remember that? I don't think they ever are called that now. They always had this residual sense amongst people that somehow or other they were going to be better on law and order. That has disappeared. We must become the real party of law and order now. Similarly, when it comes to issues of patriotism, as I said, the Tory party was always seen as the patriotic party. Well, they've blown that. They've absolutely blown it. We are the true patriotic party. These are all great and advantageous and optimistic things to be going forward for our party. And finally as well, we are the only party that talks now about British identity. Everyone says when you talk about British identity, well, what is British identity? You know those kind of Radio 4 discussions, I've been on a few. I say, yeah, but what is British identity? Why is it so difficult, actually, to tell what British identity is? It's not, Swedish identity is pretty strong, I think, from what I can see today. And also any other nation that you hope to talk about. But there's always been this kind of sense in which Britain is particularly hard to define. No, it's not. It's a belief in certain things. It's a belief in the rule of law. It's a belief in free speech. And it's a belief in equality before the law. And if you say, well, that's many other countries have that. Well, you say, well, what are the other reasons? What is specific about Britain? I would say, for example, it is a pragmatism and a practicality about our political arrangements, which that is very distinguished in Britain, and it's very unique, I would say, to Britain. No other party talks about this. Why would no other party talk about it? Why would no party talk about the downside, if you like, to multiculturalism? Why would no other party talk about the need actually to have a healthy, multi-ethnic society that is actually united in a belief in Britain? We need to do that. We need to talk about that. We need to promote that. They are not going to do it. They didn't do it before, and after the EU referendum, they're not going to do it now. We are the people who need to talk about that. Because everybody else is in bars or pubs or whatever. This is the main cause, I would say, of some people's concerns now. It came up briefly during the referendum. I remember talking, actually, during, Jamie organised something called the Believers Conference in London. And this was before the terrible death of Joe Smith. This is about halfway through the referendum campaign. And during that time, I remember feeling at the time a bit worried that actually it seemed to be that the whole way in which the campaign was being run was somehow changing slightly into one that was purely about whether you were a good person or a bad person, whether you were a racist or not. This is extraordinary, something that would never have happened back in 1975 when it was purely about the ins and outs and the benefits and disadvantages, whatever. This really was concentrated the mind, because what it really did was say, you are inward-looking, you are nasty, you are uneducated, you are basically all of these things which really don't actually describe Michael Gove, or whatever else you think about it. All of these things were somehow or other the qualities that were to be displayed in people who wanted to leave the EU, whilst the other people were open, somehow or other to everything else, to the other, and all the rest of it. Absolute rubbish, absolute rubbish. But the fact that that could be used during a referendum campaign shows you how close this issue is to the surface. And we mustn't be frightened of it. We believe in a multi-ethnic society which is united by a belief in Britain and a desire to want to be part of Britain. This is going to become more and more important, particularly now when we see what's happening in Europe. Without starting to get too, if you like, urgent about it, although I think it is a deeply urgent situation, I think that we are under sustained attack. And I think what is happening is that the establishment parties don't really have any answers to this, They don't even really talk about it. We do have to. I think we have to have a robust response to what I fear will be a rather bloody future. But anyway, that is not to be too pessimistic. I've introduced a note of despair into this. I really don't want you to feel that, because I have never been so politically excited as I am now. And I hope that you also share in that, because this is quite extraordinary, what has happened. When we voted out, when on the 24th of June, we had this result through, I remember thinking, people don't quite realise what this is actually really, the full impact of this, even globally, because Britain, by voting in a democratic way, had struck such a new blow for the idea of freedom, for the idea of the nation state, that it really cannot be underestimated. And all of my pride, which sometimes takes a knock, in our country, what we can do, it was absolutely restored on that morning. And I hope that you felt the same. Because without trying to be terribly sort of ingratiating, as older people tend to do when they talk to young audiences, it really is the case, that you are the people taking this forward. You are the people taking this forward. And it's onto your shoulders. So when people would have laughed at you before and all the rest of it, they're not laughing now, to quote some much more distinguished man. So I'm actually going to wind up now, because I think we've got these exciting hustings underway shortly. But I want to congratulate you, and I want to say what a wonderful time this is to be young and to be British. It's a wonderful time. Now, I think as a way of a parting note, we're not allowed to, I think the etiquette is wrong to start talking about people who I think you should vote for later, or who should be leaders or whatever. And I think I've been pretty open about it. But what I'm saying is that, there's going to be a lot of people coming up to the stage, whatever, but there is this guy that I've got my eye on. That my height, that my age, and he looks to me like, quite handsome.